Wake that ass up
early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the Guy. We are the Breakfast Club. We got a special guest on the line this morning.
Yes, indeed.
The brother, Dr. Steve Perry. Welcome.
Hey, Blood. How y'all been?
We're doing pretty good, man. How you been, bro?
Having the time of my life.
Hey, Dr. Steve, for anybody who, may not know who you are, tell them who you are for real quick.
Well, I think what's most important is that I'm the cat who runs schools, starts schools in the hood. Been doing that for 20 years. Many of them know me, quite frankly, because of the interview I did on Breakfast Club with Puff, who we start schools together now in New York, and more specifically in Harlem and the Bronx. We just opened up a new school in Co-op City in the Bronx. Super excited about that.
Absolutely. You know, I wanted to talk to you, Steve, because we spoke last week. After Dr. Carl was up here, the good brother Dr. Carl and you had a perspective you wanted to share, another side, so to speak. And for those of you who don't know who Carl Hart is, he's a doctor who wants to decriminalize drugs, as we all do, because people shouldn't go to jail for addiction. And he's also a person who chooses to do heroin recreationally and says that we all can do that too if done safely. What do you think about that, Dr. Perry?
So context is everything, right? First of all, the interview that you guys did was breathtaking. Like, much respect to you. That was just so compelling. That's really why Charlamagne and I even spoke. I just dropped him a line and said that was amazing. And he's clearly deeply credentialed and much respected in his field. He talks about how he grew up in Miami and the like, and that's cool too. And growing up poor and being black seems like they go together like ham and eggs. So that all is there. But the context that he operates in is a overwhelmingly wealthy, white, highly educated environment. For me, I work and live in the hood. I run schools. I start schools. You don't go to the Career Resource Center to start schools in the hood, to run schools in the hood. And in our context, what he's saying simply doesn't equate to reality. We have a school in Bridgeport, an elementary school in Bridgeport. 100 yards away from our school is a meth clinic. 100 yards. So every single morning, like right now, I'm in Bridgeport today, I can see the line forming in freezing cold outside for people trying to deal with their addiction. When he speaks of moralistic impressions of drugs, I get where he's trying to go. And again, much respect to him for having a different perspective, but he's speaking to a different audience. He's speaking to a wealthy, upper middle class, white, and other group of people who have access to healthcare, mental health care supports, as well as a family structure. Unlike many of the children and families that I work with who don't get to try heroin, who don't get to do it in a controlled environment. It's not just a moralistic difference that he and I see, it's a functional difference. There are parts of the conversation that are left out when he's talking about the difference between the way we look at drugs and the way we look at legal drugs. For instance, in order for a child to be put on any sort of Ritalin or the like, there's an entire evaluation process that begins at the school level with observing the child's behavior, having meetings with the parents, having meetings with social workers, having meetings with psychiatrists, psychologists, and then the physician. And then after that, it's monitored. And then that drug that he uses has been created in a laboratory under the most controlled conditions that we know, under the greatest umbrella of science that we're aware of. It's not created in a crack house by a high school dropout who didn't do well in chemistry, who's put anything that she or he can into this drug to make more money, to make it more addictive. So to compare the two is, to me, contextually off, and therefore doesn't make sense in its real application.
But Dr. Steve Perry, hi, how are you? First of all, good to see you.
Always great to see you, sis.
So I want to say this because I was trying to have an open mind, and I have seen him on the documentary on Netflix, Crack, and then I also read a lot of his book. And he talks about how when he first started working in this field and studying the effect of drugs on the brain, it was really with the drugs are bad for you. That was the intent, and that's what we've all learned. And he does talk about the methadone clinics and how people who are wealthy that are trying to get off drugs have access to private physicians, but it's a shameful thing. And they make you look like a villain when you have to stand outside online to go to these methadone clinics in order to receive that. So I don't think he's saying, yes, use drugs, it's good for you. I think what he's saying is that people are using drugs. There's 30 million people in this world that use drugs. As much as we've done this, drugs are bad. We know that. We've heard that so much, right? People are still doing it. So how do you make sure that they're not embarrassed to come out and say, yes, this is what I'm doing and I need to seek help if they need to seek help for that? That's how some of the message that I was getting from him was.
Yeah, and I don't hear him saying use drugs. And quite frankly, I don't think he or anybody has that kind of juice that they can get on the radio and tell people to do something. They just all start changing their life to do it. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is drugs are bad.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we don't need to go back and forth on that one. They are destructive to your body. And one of the reasons why we work so hard to control these substances is because we understand the implications of them when they are uncontrolled. We understand how they run, they ravage not just the body of a person, but a body of a community. And when you do what I do, which is work among some of the poorest children in the country, you don't have the time to talk about the intricacies of the nuances of if you just use shrooms versus using some other form of psych. I mean, this is all we have. When I'm talking to my kids, when I'm in the Bronx, if I were to stand in front of my parents and say, okay, I want to talk to y'all about how you can use drugs effectively, they contextually, they look at me like I lost my entire
And then
mind, and they should.
Now, doctor,
They also compare it to like prohibition, right? When liquor was illegal and how harmful that was, because then it was toxic. The bootleggers were making anything and people were actually dying from drinking liquor. So they ended up having to regulate it because people were drinking, and liquor's not good for you either. You know, that's a drug. I think what he's talking about is regulating things so that less people are dying from toxic substances, because most people that overdose is because they've taken something that they don't know what it is, the majority of people, or it's also a combination, right? They've taken these drugs and mixed them with other sedatives.
Now, doctor,
True.
Let me ask you a question, doctor. You heard the interview. I believe you heard the interview in full. He didn't say do drugs. He didn't say I want you to go out there and do drugs. My problem is he was comparing it and making it seem like the drug use was okay. You know, he compared it to having an orgasm, right? Which is wild. Then he compared it to how'd he put it? Oh yeah, no, I know a lot of people that use heroin as recreation or, you know, every once in a while. But my whole purpose is, yeah, even though you're not saying go use drugs, but in my opinion, you making it seem like it's okay, which is like saying go use drugs. And Charlamagne made the perfect point this morning. Donald Trump didn't say go to the Capitol and fuck shit up. He didn't say that. He just said, hey, what they're doing at the Capitol is not right, which is telling people, oh, let's go there and fuck it up, in my opinion.
Precisely. Again, this is not a nuanced conversation. It's a context conversation. He can have a conversation at Columbia University with wealthy white and Asian kids from all over the world about how they should or could think about drug use. And he can have that conversation there. Growing up in public housing, as I did, I saw drug use from the time I don't remember time that I didn't see.
You and me both.
I don't even know what it was. I don't know what it's like to grow up anywhere else, and I don't know what it's like to not see drugs.
You and me both.
So there's that. But I didn't see drugs at the level, meaning in terms of quantity, until I went off to college. I saw people moving things that other people in my community would only purchase to distribute. Like people bought things in quantities of a pound in college. I spent the lion's share of my career, with the exception of 10 months that I did at Yee's College, working in the poorest communities. And so most specifically running a homeless shelter. And I see firsthand what happens when we do allow drugs to be used. And one of the things that's super important is there's a certain laziness, if we're going to be really frank, about going to drugs instead of going to counseling, instead of going to create an opportunity for yourself. And I say laziness not as an indictment, but as an honest expression of there are other ways for us to address some of the issues that are the underpinnings that we're having. I'm not going to give him that much credit or power to say that he can make people get on or off drugs. But what I can say, and I can also say that the argument, for instance, around prohibition, that because it was prohibited, more people use it. I don't know if that's true, but I do know this. There's
no,
still
more people died from it. Not that more people use it. More people died.
And one could argue that, again, I don't know that, but what I do know is this: there are more people who die of alcoholism than opioid addiction. I do know that, and alcohol is legal. And I can go one step further, that during COVID, when everything was shut down, the package stores were open because it was seen as an essential service. So I am not going to sit here and suggest that there is not something to be said about the way in which we treat substances. Somebody comes to the cookout with a bottle of your favorite alcohol, and everybody's like, there's a party, right? If they come clicking a vial of crack, ain't nobody like, there's a party. There's a different moral that we look at it differently. If somebody comes with a syringe, nobody's like, there's a party, or unfurling out of tinfoil crack rocks or heroin. No one's going to see it that way. I get that. But
people do call cocaine partying. Like, people will be like, they do. Let me ask you this, though. So if not suggestion-wise, right, because people are still using drugs that are illegal, how do you prevent that from happening? And how do you prevent people from dying from that? And how do you prevent people from buying drugs off the street?
Very big question. I think, one of the many reasons why I'm a huge fan of the work that you guys do. There's no simple answers to that. No one person knows that, including me. What I do, so can I just answer what I do? What I do is create academic experiences that respect Black and Latin people in our communities and show them that they're beautiful and powerful and that they don't need to go that route. I show them that there's a future for them beyond these circumstances, and they don't have to allow the unearned disadvantages that they have to be compounded by adding additional disadvantages of drugs to their life. I show them that there's something more powerful in their brain that they can develop than putting something in their body to take them to an altered state. That's my contribution to the conversation. In addition to that, we create schools within which we understand that mental health is not something that is separate and apart, but embedded in the academic experience, that we understand that growing up Black and poor is the most traumatic social experience that we have in the United States of America, that is only worsened by other traumas, but at its base is itself a trauma. So what we do is that other people, when I was running the homeless shelter, what I might have said is that I want mental health support in a context where people can gain access to it earlier and cheaper. If I were working in another setting, if I were working in a hospital setting, I might want to put in place some sort of detox opportunity. So depending upon what someone does, in my lane, in my context, what I do, it means putting myself out there in our community with our team of mainly Black and Latin people to start our own schools, to start the revolution that needs to happen, the power that needs to happen, because at the root of every revolution is education for me. And what that means is teaching young people that you are so freaking beautiful. Man, you're so smart. If you knew how powerful you were, you wouldn't even dare put that drug in your body for your sake, because you got so much going for you. You don't want nothing to slow this down. The high that's coming your way, oh man.
Absolutely.
What do you think, Dr. Perry? What do you think about Dr. Carl Karharts' comments that we have exaggerated the impact of hard drugs in America?
I think he's wrong. I just fundamentally think he's wrong. You don't need 100% of your hood to be slinging in order for your entire community to be jacked up. You just need like 5 or 6 dudes on one block terrorizing the entirety of the community as they try to run the block. You don't need everybody to be in that space. The threat that they offer in their attempt to address whatever it is that they're dealing with is actual, is real. And so again, at Columbia University, maybe it's not that big a deal. Maybe it's not. But in Harlem, where I work, he works at Columbia, I work in Harlem. They're in the same place, but they might as well be on different planets. Where I work, drugs are really a big deal. And they're the reason why, in so many cases, some of my teachers can't walk to their cars without somebody following them. It's the reason why so many of my kids are afraid. I can't tell you, let me just be real quick about this. I can't tell you how many kids we're supposed to have as a New York, as a public school in New York, charter schools and public schools. As a public school in New York, we're supposed to have a zero tolerance. So if a kid brings a knife into the school, bring some other weapon into the school, I'm supposed to expel them. Like, just straight up. That's just the whole story. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many times I have to work through that in my own conscious. When I have a child who I know has a weapon on them, they're not bringing it to the school to cause harm to the school. They're just trying to get to school. And I have to ask myself, when I carried a weapon, was I carrying it to hurt somebody in school? Was I just carrying it to just get from my house to my school? So what stood in between me and my school were not poppy seeds. It was crack. When he's talking about that the crack epidemic was overblown, come on, bro. Over by who? Like, what's over? Over than what? Like, what does that mean? I don't know what he saw. And again, I can't speak to what he saw in his context. I can only talk about what I saw when I was in Philadelphia, when I was working down in Philadelphia, in North Philly. And when I was in the bottoms in Philly, called the bottoms, and what it looked like. And I can tell him what it was this morning when I went to visit our elementary school, and it looks like zombies walking by. I don't know what he sees when he goes to his job. I just know what I see when I go to my job. And I don't want people using drugs. Call me a square. I'll be a square all day. I'm cool with that. I'll be your square.
Just to talk about how he explained it, though, I think what Dr. Carhart was saying was that the issue, it is deeper than drugs, right? It is the communities, the people that are underemployed or unemployed, people dealing with anxiety and with depression, and then they're buying drugs off the street to try to treat that, not knowing what's in these drugs also. And then also, I think a difference in how people look at white people who use drugs and how they look at Black people who use drugs, because white people use drugs too, right? And people who are middle class and wealthy use drugs also, but they're not looked at the same way as criminals and as addicts, the way that Black people are.
All true. There is nothing that Black people do other than make music and play games, where when we do it, people think we're cooler at it. Like, let's just call that what it is, right? Let's just name that for what it is. But that's okay with me. I'm cool with the fact that I don't want African Americans and Latin people to be elevated in our drug use. I'm okay with that. Like, I'm okay that that's not a thing. Every issue that we face is compounded by drug use. Every issue. If racism is an issue, add drugs to it. If sexism is an issue, add drugs to it. If poverty is an issue, add drugs to it. It is possible to say both are true, meaning that there is racism and we should not be doing anything to in any way justify drug use. I mean, I'm not a fan of Nancy Reagan either, or her husband. Let's just call it what it is. When I was growing up, he said that ketchup was a vegetable, right? So I'm not okay with that. And that actually impacted me because I was one of those poor kids whose lunches got diminished because I had free lunch. So my lunch, my vegetable was a packet of what do you call it?
Ketchup.
Was a packet of ketchup. I got that. I'm all there for that. But what I also want to make it clear is that I'm not going to draw false equivalents. And Charlamagne made this point. You can't keep drawing these false equivalents like it's not the same. It's just not the same. It is different. Here's one of the many places that he and I can completely violently agree. It's different to be Black, even light skin with curly hair Black. It's different.
Yeah, that rhetoric he's spitting is just scary, you know, and it's for somebody who's seen up close and personal, somebody who has OD'd and died, you know, 2 people in my family. When I go to these homes and I purchase these effed up cribs and I see heroin addicts in the house and strung out, and I have these conversations because you got to ask them to leave, you know, and I ask them, you know, how, and like you said, a lot of them come from wealthy families and they can't kick it. And they tried it one time and they're stuck. And it's not like, okay, I can give up. No, it's they need that hit. And when he was talking about orgasm is the same, I'm like, I ain't never seen nobody pawn a TV for some sex. You know what I mean? No. I ain't never seen nobody, you know, rob their grandmama's purse for some sex or hurt somebody for some vagina. I never. But I mean, I've seen it all the time for heroin and crack and coke and a lot of other these things that people are strung off of. So I don't even want to say that it's okay and that you can do it recreational. Like, that is just crazy to me.
I just think the conversation is interesting because a lot of things we've tried haven't worked. And so I'm open-minded to, because he's done like 25 years of research on this, right? And has changed his own viewpoint based on the research that he's done. And not saying, yes, it's okay to do drugs, but like, for instance, and this is for adults, not for kids, by the way. And he always stresses that. He's not saying that kids can make these determinations, but he's saying that responsible adults who are, you know, take care of all their responsibilities know, like, for instance, if I do shrooms, I'm not going to do a huge bag of shrooms. I know just take a little bit. Or if you do edibles, you know, I'm not going to eat 20 edibles.
That's not heroin, though, Yee. I think
you're going to have a little bit. So what he's saying is people can make that, because he did the micro dosing or whatever. And listen, I'm never trying heroin. I can tell you that, like, that's not going on.
But he is, though.
That's what I'm saying.
He is.
And he has.
But he is.
And he has tried it. But what he's saying is there's more people that don't get addicted than do.
Which is not true.
But I'm just telling you what his argument is, because I don't know. I haven't studied it to have my own firsthand information. And just because I was reading it, so I try to look at it from both sides, right? It hasn't worked to say, just say no to drugs. It hasn't worked to say, well, you need to go to rehab and you need to get treatment. So he wants to make sure that people will still be alive if that's the choice that they're making to do it. How do you do it in a more responsible way so you don't die? Just like people have the needle exchange program where they trade in their dirty needles to get clean ones. I don't know. I don't know what the real answer is, but I'm just looking at it like a lot of things haven't worked.
I agree with all that, but, you know, I would push back and say we haven't tried hard enough. You know what I mean? Because we still send people with addiction to prison instead of getting them rehabilitation. So I would ask you, Dr. Perry, do you think we'll ever get to that point in this country where we'll move to complete rehabilitation instead of prison when it comes to nonviolent drug offenses?
As long as the offenders are Black and Latin and poor, no. We're not likely to be seen as full humans. It's not just in the writing of the Constitution. It's just it's a whole deal. So the short answer to that is the people who generationally have enslaved us are likely not going to change their wicked ways, if we're just going to be frank about that. But that doesn't mean that we can't do something. I go back to what Envy was just saying. If you've never visited a house that is a crack den, that is a place where people are living as squatters, if you've never walked into to experience that stench, I mean, and it is a stench, it's a vomit-inducing stench. If you've never seen that, then I can completely understand why you might be able to have an esoteric conversation about it. Like you might be able to talk about changing things around the edges. I get that. I completely get that. But once you have done that, and you've gone in there and seen not just stray dogs in there, but children who are being treated no differently than the stray dog. When you see them in squalor and dirt coming through their nose, and when you go to the toilet and the feces is packed so high that's to be shoveled out, then you start to see, you know what, this thing that we thought was a victimless crime is actually not a victimless crime. Actually, people really are dying from this in a real way. So what that means to me, Charlamagne, and I go back to when you asked me the question, which I think is a fantastic question. What do I think? I think from my place, we have to create avenues where we are. So you through your meetings, through your means, and me through mine, we have to create our own. I'm not asking anybody to come in and solve problems in my community. I just want everybody to be really crystal clear on that, lest you hear anything other coming out of my mouth. I'm saying as a Black man in my community, I'm not asking anybody to come in and solve this problem for me. I'm not doing that. What I want to do is I want to put as many brothers and sisters together and allies who believe in what we believe to come in and get the work done. So for me, what happens is, and this could sound like it's spitting in the ocean, but in our schools, I'm going to use this as an example. We work really hard to teach children the language of mental health so that they can explain how they feel so that we can hear them when they're struggling. We want them to speak to us in the language of mental health so that they can have a conversation with us about how they're feeling. And if we all do that, and that's something anyone can do in their own home, right? You can explain to your daughters when you're feeling a certain way, how to express that, how you feel put upon, and teaching young boys about how to be vulnerable and to speak about their feelings so that they don't go do these other things to try and mask their feelings. Because I find that every one of the children that I engage who is engaged in some sort of substance abuse is trying to self-medicate. Not some, not most. They're not just trying to get high because it's fun. They drink because it's fun. Like if we're just going to have an honest conversation, if they want to just have fun with their boys, they drink. When they lighten something up, if they're putting something in their arm or they're popping pills, what it doesn't take but a second to realize, especially in the case of most boys that I work with, and what they're doing is they're trying to self-medicate. And that is the issue. What we can do is at the front end, and you guys do such a fantastic job about this, talk about mental health for real, like for real, every day, mention it. It is a real damn thing. Like, it's real. To me, more lethal, if we want to have that conversation, I agree. Mental health unchecked is far more lethal than substance use. Let's just not let's call it what it is. Someone can have mental health issues and not be addicted to anything and take themselves out or take other people out.
Mm-hmm.
And a person could be addicted to something and never want to cause harm to anyone. I'm not that guy. So do I think that we'll get there? I mean, not in a larger society, but we got to stop going to other people to solve our problems. Is where I come from. Mm-hmm. Even though we didn't get here by ourselves, we ain't gonna get out by asking somebody to come in and undig this ditch that they put us in. That's not gonna happen.
Yeah, you know what, man? I agree with you, and I agree with Dr. Carl when he says we should decriminalize drugs, because I refuse to accept the fact that people should go to prison for addiction. But I just can't encourage people to do crack and heroin recreationally. I don't think the black people are in any position to allow that type of rhetoric to go. And I don't think we should attempt to create safe spaces for folks to do hard drugs. To your point, let's get them help. Let's provide them with jobs and opportunities. Let's provide them with better mental health resources. Let's teach them a trade so they can be more productive citizens. Because a lot of people, man, they turn to drugs because they're trying to escape their trauma.
Yeah, literally. I mean, they'll tell you. I mean, just ask. I'm sure, Envy, when you're in those houses and you say, man, how did you get here? I'll tell you a really quick story. There was a cat who, at the shelter that I was working at, and, regular looking white guy, right? Like, like you just see like regular looking white guy, like whatever, not anyone, not losing, hadn't lost any teeth. He lost everything because of drugs. And so I asked him, how did you lose everything? Like, he said, well, it just became a thing. Over time, I worked to get high. Like, I worked to get high, and I had a small business and what have you. And so I said to him, if I took you to Alaska and dropped you off away from everybody, would that be what you need? He said, no. He said, I'd find a way to cop. He lost his kids. He lost his business. He lost his spouse. He lost his house. That doesn't happen, to your point earlier, Charlamagne, because you're trying to chase some tail. Ain't nobody losing everything because they're trying to get with some envy. You ain't getting, just because you're trying to get some behind, you ain't losing everything behind that mess. I don't care how cute she is.
I don't think we can deny that drugs are really harmful, and for a lot of people. But do you think there are people who use drugs that can still function in society 100%. And work and be responsible?
100%. Absolutely. There are people who do things. I mean, look, Willie Nelson has been high since we were kids, right?
It's weed.
Right. So let's just stay there. But he's functioning on a drug. To the question of just a basic question, can you be? Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you another story. A very good friend of mine, my very best friend, who's an Emmy Award-winning producer at a large network, recently passed away because of alcoholism.
It has to catch up.
High function.
It
catches up. Division I athlete, beautiful brother. If you saw him just to the last man, and to your point, I've never seen him drunk. I have never seen him drunk in my life. We've known each other since we were children. I've never seen him drunk, but his body apparently did. His body was like, enough is enough. And by the time we figured it all out, things would function at 10%. 10%. So do I think that there are people who are functioning? I absolutely do. I have an uncle who was using since I don't remember the time when he wasn't. That dude is still alive. And every time I see him, I'm like, damn, how is he still living? Like, what is this? But the question becomes, what is the quality of life when that substance is controlling your movement, right? Mm-hmm. It's fantastically different when you do something and it is recreational, right? And you do it and you leave it and you go on back to it. That's fine. for me, I watched the Tiger King, and I watched them playing with those big cats. And then I watched the one person lose her arm. That's one arm for one person too many for me. That's good enough for me.
Me too.
Yeah, listen, I think so. Is there can you do something? Can you do drugs recreationally without being addicted?
I can't, because I've had substance abuse in my family. I'm not that guy. I'm not testing fate. I don't agree with him when he suggests that substance abuse doesn't run in the family. There's too much research that actually counters his point. And again, he is highly credentialed, highly respected. I'm not questioning his credentials or his opinion, but I also have an opinion as someone who works in this space on the other side. And on the other side, it is often the case, whether it's nature or nurture, I can't make the distinction. And honestly, I don't care. I don't care if the reason why this child is trying drugs is because drugs are in his house, or if he's trying drugs because that's somehow his predisposition to do so. For me, it doesn't matter at all.
No, well, children shouldn't be doing drugs. They shouldn't be smoking cigarettes. They shouldn't be drinking liquor. They shouldn't be doing any of the. But that's why he's not saying for children.
It doesn't matter though. But the platforms that are using, children listen as well.
Absolutely.
Like this platform right here is 18 to 34, and we have young children and teens that listen as well. And by him saying,
and we got liquor on the wall too.
But him saying that drug use.
You got liquor on your wall too, though.
I know,
that's what I'm saying. I'm not arguing for that.
Liquor's not illegal though. But him saying that you can use drugs and comparing it to sex is a false
equivalent. But not just drugs, heroin.
Like that is a problem.
But even his heroin story, though, his heroin story is different. Like one of the things that we have to do is we have to deconstruct the heroin story. He says that he used heroin in a different country where it was under basically doctor supervision,
and not here, right?
Damn.
Not here. He used heroin in a different country under the doctor's supervision. That's what he says.
That's a place of privilege.
Well, yeah, quite a bit. And so again, you can use many drugs. Many drugs are used under a doctor's supervision, managed by a doctor. But let's just be clear. Michael Jackson used drugs under doctor supervision. So let's see how that worked out for him, as did Prince. Mm-hmm. I mean, they both were not presumably out there copping on a corner. I didn't see Prince out in the heels on a corner copping. He was likely using something that was given to him by a physician. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure he was under the doctor's care, but it caught up with him. And it cost us this beautiful brother, so brilliant. I mean, come on, don't you wish that your children could see what Prince and Michael were like
Absolutely.
Like, wouldn't you love to just experience their concert with them? They didn't die because they were too old or because they were black. They died because of drugs. Right. They died because of drugs. That they died just as regular as anybody else. And that's what my point is. I get what I think he wants to say when he's saying, if you're going to use, don't do this, don't do that. If the objective is to make it safer for people to use drugs, then work on a policy side. Work on a side where you can regulate it. Work on those issues. Put it in place where you can regulate it and it can be delivered in a certain way and what have you, like people are doing with marijuana, right? Like people have done with alcohol. There's certain kinds of alcohol even now that you can't buy. You got to go do moonshine for that because it's just too dangerous to make you blind, right? So even the way our alcohol is produced is believed to be the safest way to consume it. But if a bartender sells you too much, then and you go wreck a car, that bartender is as liable as anybody else, just like a drug dealer, to your safety. So we have a checks and balances in place. But along the way, and again, I get it. When he's talking about the moralistic side of it, I get where he's going. I really do. We do make distinctions where there is no difference, right? We do make a distinction between alcohol and drugs, like there is a profound difference. Not really, depending upon your access to one or the other. But I've seen people, I'm not just talking about research, I've seen the effects of a thing like heroin take shape immediately. I've seen a pretty girl who was smart and on her way within 6 months be a wrap on that junk, on that smack, on that foolishness. It's just not to make the argument in the public square as if everybody's created equally and in the same way, able to enjoy this freedom. He speaks of the original promise, which is a really interesting thing for a brother to say when talking about slave owners, but that's a different conversation. Even if you take the spirit of what you believe the promise to be, the promise was not so that you can get high and destroy your life. That's not what the promise was. The pursuit of happiness at its core is meant as in my belief, about exploring who you are as a person, period. Yeah. And that to me is fundamentally different than what we're talking about.
Yeah, we should definitely humanize addicts, and we should definitely decriminalize drugs, because people with addiction should not go to prison. But
I agree.
We shouldn't decriminalize drugs so we can recreationally use heroin or crack, because I've never seen hard drugs not catch up.
What about Dr. Carhart? Do you think that he looks like, I know when you asked him, he asked if you ever seen a functioning addict, or you said that, and he said you're looking at one. Because he talks about education too, and he did bring up A$AP Yams, right? And he said he had a conversation with A$AP Yams' mother, reached out to him, right? And he discussed how, and I have her quote. She said she learned, while it is possible to die from an overdose of an opioid alone, this is uncommon. The majority of opioid-related deaths involve multiple drugs, especially combining opioids with other sedatives like alcohol or something I can't pronounce. So he did have all of a cocktail of drugs in his system. And so she says, was he aware of the potential dangers of mixing opioids with other sedatives? I certainly wasn't. Even if it makes us uncomfortable, I wish public health messages about drugs were more clear and simple and emphasizing real concerns as opposed to hyping less likely outcomes. I wish such messages simply stated, don't combine opioids with other sedatives. If they did, perhaps my son would be alive today. So what about the education part of it, right? Of letting people know this can kill you if you do this.
So I think that it's a nuanced conversation that doesn't require a nuance, because we can have fact-based conversations. For instance, they went after the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma for producing oxycodone or Oxycontin. And okay, fine. But the majority of deaths from opioids are not from the proper use of those pills. It's just not. So we could have that conversation, but it doesn't change the fact that there are people dying of opioids. So, right? That's a real thing. And there were in the 80s, it was called crack. And so do I think it's important to educate people? Always. But then educate them in the totality. So for instance, for him to say that because he researches drugs, he uses them, he wouldn't go then to an HIV doctor. He wouldn't go to Anthony Fauci and expect that Anthony Fauci would inject himself with HIV to prove that he in fact understands the suffering of somebody who's going through that horrible disease. It's not the way it happens. From a physician's perspective and from a psychiatrist's and from a social worker's perspective, it's my job to avoid these things, not to try them. That's not the goal here. I don't need to in order to serve poor children, I don't need to have been a poor kid. I don't need to do that. I don't need to then go backwards in poverty and move back to the same housing project that I lived in. And my mother finally she got up out of there. So I got to pull her back down too. It doesn't make sense. He's occupying a position of privilege that I don't think he truly has internalized. And if you spent the lion's share of your career at Stanford, Yale, and Columbia, it's hard to not be impacted. And then in between, they're traveling internationally to have these conversations with largely white Europeans on drugs and drug use. It's not the same. It's just not the same as what we contend with on a simple basis. And so for me, the answer is don't do drugs. It just is. That's just the answer. It's not don't do them wrong. It's don't do them, because my kids don't have a second layer. There's no bench for my kids. There's no place for them to go if they try this. They don't get to try it. Only thing I need them to do is to try to learn to read, try to learn to do math, try to learn to compute. And I need them to try to speak through their trauma. That's what I need them focused on. I don't need them out there deciding whether or not they're going to do that. You can do that when you go to an elite college. You can do that when you work at elite colleges, because there's a social net where you can drop down, 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 down. And there's a far fall until you hit rock bottom. Our children start out on the pavement. I'm not making it worse. And I'm not going to co-sign a conversation in which it could even be conceived of it. And I'm just not doing it.
And the thing that's crazy, like you mentioned, like he said, I'm a functioning addict, right? But then he said he's not addicted. So what is the definition of an addict?
I think for him, he said an addict is, or maybe he said a functioning user. I don't remember exactly what it was. But in the book, he says an addict is somebody that I guess doesn't do their responsibilities and can't function and doesn't go and handle what they have to do and miss functions and things like that.
So to me, an addict, according to what I know in working in the field, an addict is someone who needs this thing. That doesn't mean that they miss activities. They may be very much at these activities.
Correct.
She may be dropping her children off in the Volvo at school every day. She may do that every day. And then as soon as she gets home, she goes and she uses a pill, or she uses this drug, or she sips the alcohol. Once it's part of your life and it's part of your coping, then it's an addiction. And what that addiction manifests itself as is different for each person. Not every person has to lose their teeth. Not every person has to lose their job. Not every person has to lose their family. But you do lose your freedom, and that's an addict. An addict loses their freedom to determine whether or not they're going to use that substance or going to engage in that behavior. That's when you're addicted.
Dr. Steve Perry, where can they find you,
Thank you,
brother?
They can go at Dr. Steve Perry on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. But the most important thing is, sounds like a strange segue. Right now, our schools are open, and we're super excited about that. We are accepting applications. They can go to wearecapitalprep.org. That's in Connecticut and New York. We love your listeners, and your listeners are our parents. And we want your listeners and our parents to know that we love your children, and we very badly want to be a part of their academic experience. And we want to teach them how to communicate through the trauma. We want to teach them to dream big, because we send 100% of our graduates on to four-year colleges every single year since we opened in 2005. That's a school founded by Black people for Black and Latin people. That's not going to stop just because the system keeps pushing it and making it harder for us to do. So actually, I gotta go testify now before the state legislature in Connecticut to try and get more access. So please, thank you so much. Keep doing what y'all do. Please keep doing what y'all do. I know I couldn't stop you if I wanted to. Thank you so much. We need the beige up in here.
Tell the students I said hi and much love, because I did come in and have an opportunity to talk to some of the young girls at the school about social media.
They love you like an older sister. Like every time you come through, like for real, I just wish that people, before we go, I just wish that people knew you guys on the other side of all the stuff that you do and how much of an impact you have on the community when nobody's watching. Like, I really wish, I know that you guys mention it, and I know it's not really the most entertaining thing to do, but if simple, just from one brother to a sister and two brothers, can y'all just talk more about what you do outside of this work? Because I don't think that people truly understand that what you really do, and how many times I run into one or all of y'all out in my work when no cameras are there, no microphones are there. You're just doing it. You're not even posting it, right? You're not even posting it to Instagram or anything. You're just doing it. I don't want you to post it, but I do want people to know that that's how you really live. And I have nothing but respect for what y'all do. I love the Breakfast Club. Y'all got me in trouble because I watched that last interview and I was late to a meeting. So I'm not going to do that again. I got 5 minutes. Thank you so much. I love y'all.
Brother. Peace.
All right, man.
All right, peace.
Steve Perry, it's the Breakfast Club. Good morning.